Now, we don't know who the candidates are, first of all. We're still early on. But we have two frontrunners in the present president, Joe Biden, and the once president, maybe future president, Donald Trump. Just taking those examples, what do we think we know about what the economic policies would look like under those two presidents?
Well, these are they have vastly different visions, of course. Joe Biden is a kind of FDR Democrat, lean in. Government can be a positive force in the economy. Let's pass the infrastructure bill. Let's implement the IRA, and so on and so forth. And so I think you'd expect him to do more of the same. I think there's a real question about who's going to control Congress, which may limit his degrees of freedom. The budget deficit is $2 trillion, and I think people are starting to focus on that, which will limit his degrees of freedom. But there's still an enormous amount of implementation that he can and should do of the laws already passed, as well as a lot of stuff that can be done regulatorily. And this is not one I happen to agree with, but for example, the extraordinarily robust antitrust enforcement that's going on at the moment. I think you'll see all that from him. I think Donald Trump has gone even further into the populist world, based on the rhetoric at least, and based on the advice he's getting from people like Bob Lighthizer. And you're going to see a very protectionist, mercantilist economic policy, including things like banning imports of television sets from China, which seems kind of ridiculous. We import all our bicycles from China. We're going to stop having bicycles and so on. So he's got all of that. And I think you will see an absolutely opposite regulatory approach from what you would see from Joe Biden in terms of let 1,000 flowers bloom, let people go do what they want, and let's roll back the regulatory state.
So a lot of the traditional economists might really take issue with some of what Donald Trump is proposing. But what about global Wall Street? Because as you described that, a lot of more government, more regulation on the one hand, less government, less taxes, I would say, less government involvement on the other. A lot of the business community would say, well, the second one sounds better to me.
Sure. Look, there were a lot of people who basically, on Wall Street, who you and I would know, who voted for Trump once or even twice. Basically, look, I don't like the guy, but I like the policies, and they got what they wanted. The TCJA, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act, being the most prominent. But you'll remember a lot of us kind of got this wrong. On election night, when it looked like Trump was going to win, initially the market crashed. Then people said, wait a minute, like 3 o'clock in the morning, they said, oh, wait a minute, the market soared up again, and it kind of took off from there, and then you had COVID and whatnot. This time may be more complicated because Trump's policies are not mainstream Republican orthodoxy. He's often the populist world with all these tariffs, which business hate, with shutting down immigration, which business hates. They need the workers. So I don't know that global Wall Street, and plus all of his anti-democratic authoritarian talk, I think it scares people. And so I'm not sure whether Wall Street will react well to another Trump victory.
What about the protectionist stance? Because he has said 10% tariffs across the board. Robert Lighthizer, you referred to, he's written a book that says we'll keep going, we'll keep increasing until we eliminate the trade deficit. What could that do to the economy, perhaps not just in the United States, but also globally? I mean, we had something called Smoot-Hawley, as I recall, back in 1930.
Yeah, I mean, Smoot-Hawley didn't cause the Depression, it exacerbated it. The Depression and the crash that happened before Smoot-Hawley, people thought Smoot-Hawley was a solution to it, and of course it just made the problem worse. It was like leeching people in the old days, and that's kind of what it is. Look, I don't think there's any debate among serious economists. From a macroeconomic standpoint, trade is good, therefore moving against trade is bad in terms of the impact on the overall economy. Whether we go into a crash and a depression, I'm not sure I would predict that, but it's bad. On a micro level, the problem with free trade, so to speak, is that there were jobs lost. The opening of China into the WTO unabashedly, unquestionably caused us manufacturing jobs. But the overall economy was better. Everything you and I bought was cheaper and better because it was made in China. And yeah, we can reverse all that. We can ban television sets and bicycles from China, and the consequences would be not, I don't think, disastrous, but they would be noticeably bad.
You mentioned anti-democratic initiatives, as they can be called, President Trump. What about the rule of law? That feels a bit abstract. At the same time, how much of our economy is really based on the fact that we sort of know how the legal system works, how the courts will rule in a given case, in a commercial dispute, for example, or when bonds go bad. We know what that is. If that got undermined, what could that do to our economy?
Look, the rule of law is fundamental to the function of a capitalist, free enterprise society. And if you look around the world at countries, and you say, the economic development people say, okay, well, what do we need to do to get this country moving again? Rule of law is always like number 1, 2, or 3. It's at the top of every list. So obviously, stepping back from that could have pretty bad consequences. He hasn't really said too much about that yet, so we don't really know. And look, it's uncharted waters for us. We've never had a president or even a candidate seriously say, I'm going to roll back the rule of law. But it would be bad. We all know it would be bad. How bad, I'm not sure I'm ready to predict that yet.